If you have your Bibles, if you turn to Genesis chapter 10. Genesis chapter 10. As you're turning there this morning, I want to go ahead and start out with a word of prayer. Dear Lord, I just thank you so much for your word. I thank you for the depths. And as much as we study, we'll never come to the core of your word. I just thank you for that. I just thank you for the richness of it. Just use me as a vessel this morning, dear Lord. And if anything in this outline does not need to be spoken, just replace it. Dear God, just edify us and convict us where we need to be convicted in your word. And just thank you so much for this opportunity we have. In your precious holy name we do pray. Amen. Well, in Genesis chapter 10, once again, we have a long list of names. But it's true, as the saying is, if you remember in Genesis chapter 5, there's more to the meaning. There's a deeper meaning than what we have here. There's a fascination in our culture now, even more than ever, with genealogy. You have all these sites talking about DNA, taking your DNA, and finding out where your families had come from. It's something that I think it gives people maybe just a bit of value, maybe, in finding their value in their ancestors, or maybe it's just a curiosity. But what we have here this morning is something that's really fascinating. This is called the Table of Nations. And from this chapter, all the nations are put in place. You can imagine as the flood, and we've been studying in the flood, wiped everything clean. Now, to these three sons, God is placing all the pieces together, almost like a chessboard, for things that are going to happen. Now, this list is not extensive. We have to understand this is not an extensive list. It's very selective. And the nations represented here still play a part, many of them play a part today in prophecy. From these three sons that we're going to mention, all the nations were formed. And I'm going to be using a lot of placement of these nations from a work from a man who's a Christian anthropologist named H.S. Miller, who dedicated a lot of his life to studying and putting these in context. And his work is invaluable. It's incredible. So I'll be using a lot of his work as well as we go. But as we go, if you're in chapter 10, starting in verse 1, it says, "Now this is the genealogy of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And sons were born to them after the flood." Now, from this, we have a list of all the nations. And let's start first with the sons of Japheth. In verse 2, it says, "The sons of Japheth were Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, and Meshach, and Tiras." I want to stop there just for a second. What we have with Japheth, this line, and it says in verse 5, "From these, the coastland peoples of the Gentiles were separated into their lands." And just a little bit based on H.S. Miller's work and other people's work as well, we can see how these sons formed nations. And we start with Gomer. Gomer is the Germanic people, the German people, the French, the Spanish, the Celtic peoples come from this line. Magog, Tubal, and Meshach are the Russian people. Now, you've heard in the Bible, and even in Revelation, you hear that word again, Magog. Magog is an important part of end times prophecy. And we see that this is referring to the Russian people. Now, when we come to Madai, that's the Medes. We learn a lot of the Medes of the Persians in the time of Daniel. And you see most of our lineage today, if I could go out on a limb, I would say most of our lineage of us represented, maybe many of us that are listed online, come from this line of Japheth. But these are nations that have been put in place. These nations were put in place by God for his glory. Now, as we go on, we see in verse 6 that the sons of Ham were Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. From Cush populated the African and the Middle East, the Far East. Mizraim is actually a Hebrew word. It's another word for Egypt. So there's we see the Egyptian people. And Canaan, we see Canaan all through. Canaan were the ones that populated that would be the Holy Land. And we also remember that Ham, in chapter 9, was cursed. Actually, Canaan cursed through Ham for the sins that he did against his father. And lastly, we're looking at the sons of Shem. Verse 21 to 22, it says, "And the children were born also to Shem, the father of all of the children of Eber." Now stop there just for a second. That word Eber is where we get the word Hebrew. This is the Semitic people. This is God's chosen people. They're coming from the line of Shem. This is where God is going to build the people where eventually the Messiah will come from this line. Now, this morning, I'm not here this morning to give you a history lesson. As fascinating as this is, and it really is very fascinating, that's not my purpose in bringing this message this morning. My message is to tell you that what we're seeing here is the building of two kingdoms. There are two kingdoms at work in this chapter. Two kingdoms at work. Now, a lot of times, if you see a movie that's really good, or even a book that's really good, sometimes the author will go back and he'll do what's called a prequel. Sometimes they'll do a sequel, there's a sequel after the book. Sometimes they'll go before and say, this is how all this happened. What we're seeing here is a prequel of how everything else in the history of Scripture, in the history of the world, is going to take place. And it all comes from these two kingdoms. Now, these two kingdoms are being built in different ways. First of all, Satan is building his kingdom in this chapter. You see, Satan has the architect of this design, but he needed a master builder. And he found that master builder in a guy named Nimrod. And we'll see that in verse 8. It says, "Cush begot Nimrod. He was a mighty one on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord." Now we see that Nimrod, and we're going to talk a lot more about him just in a second, that Nimrod was the architect for this false kingdom. This kingdom was going to be built with brick and mortar. It's going to be built on pride and power. And this kingdom still stands today, stronger than ever. And we see that God's kingdom is also being built as he picks this line. Why did he pick Shem? Why Eber? See, God's choosing was based on his sovereign will and weakness and humility. And through obedience, and through faith, and through his sovereign will, his kingdom is being built for the Messiah to come. But let's look a little bit more about Nimrod. He said, who is Nimrod? Well, we talked a little bit. He was a mighty one of the earth. All we see in Scripture is a few verses. I'm going to share a little bit of what Josephus and maybe some other writers have said about him. But what we see is he was a mighty man. He was a man that would have stature. He was a man that would have this presence. And that's what people look for in leaders. A natural leader is a man that can take command. A natural leader is someone that can have that presence where you say, this guy is someone I would follow. And Nimrod was that man. Now, it says something interesting here. It says that in verse 9 that he was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Now, that statement, if you go back to the first century Jewish understanding, the Jewish commentators, the rabbis, it's understood like this. He was a mighty hunter. That word they actually used was he was a trap layer. He laid traps. He ensnared people. He ensnared people. Before the Lord was in the face of the Lord, in defiance of God. He would bring people together to defy God. He was a crafty man. Read a little bit of what Josephus said. This is the words of Josephus now. He was a historian, Jewish historian, and his words carry a lot of weight. And he said, "Now it was Nimrod who excited them to such an affront and contempt of God. He was the grandson of Ham, the son of Noah, a bold man of great strength of hand. He persuaded them not to ascribe to God as if it was through him, but his means that they were happy." In other words, it's not because of God. It's because of what we're doing. Don't thank God. It's because of us. But to believe what was their own courage which procured their happiness. Humanism started so early. This whole idea is that we can find contentment in ourselves. We can find value in what we do. We don't have to have God. We're talking about the grandson of Noah was building this and growing this. He also gradually changed the government into tyranny. You remember in chapter 9, when Noah came off the boat, God made a couple of provisions. One provision, of course, is they could eat meat, they could eat from the land, but also he established this government that they could have control. He talked about capital punishment. He was talking about taking control. Here, Nimrod is saying that we need to change the government into our hands. It says he also gradually changed the government into tyranny, seeing no other way of turning men from the fear of God, but to bring them into a constant dependence on his power. He also said that he would be revenged on God. If he should have the mind to drown the world again, for that he would build a tower so high that the waters wouldn't even be able to reach. And he would avenge himself on God for destroying their forefathers. So we can see that although this man Nimrod is the one speaking, we can see the design and the architect at play of a human government to bring down God. A human government architected by Satan to destroy God's power. Now, when it talks about Nimrod, I want to say this because Nimrod is an archetype. We see leaders like this today. It talks about ensnaring. He was a great hunter and snare. When you lay a trap, what do you have to have a successful trap? Does anyone know? Bait. You have to have good bait. The best bait is what people want. Now, if I had a trap up here with just like garbage, no one would want to come to that. But you have to have something what people want. And Nimrod knew what they wanted to hear. His voice was like honey to their ears. He would know what they want. It's so easy to turn a man's heart. Because what does it say about our heart? It's deceitfully wicked. It's deceitfully wicked. Nimrod persuaded people with words. He persuaded people with power. You see, our heart is never far from evil. We talked about this a couple weeks ago about our sin nature. We can walk with God and think we have this immunity. We can build, we think that we are so strong. But we are just one thought away from stumbling. And Nimrod knew the words to speak. He knew how to entrap man, ensnare man. He knew to speak to say, aren't we of value? Look what we did. Look what we can accomplish if we do it together. All come together. His words would have had drip like honey. And, you know, he had something that's described as cult of personality. You might have heard that term before, cult of personality. That's someone, when you look at history and you look at a dictator or even a cult leader, and you say, how could those people have followed him? How could they have bought into that doctrine? How could they have done what they commanded them to do? And then you see the person, you see the influence, you hear the words, and it's almost mesmerizing. You see, we can be led into this false assurance. Now, as I said, what we're seeing here is the birth of the kingdom that's still alive today. Very strong today. And as a matter of fact, even stronger now than it ever has been. But you see, now God's kingdom was a plan of redemption. God had come up with his people, his chosen people from the line of Shem. This Hebrew would be Hebrew. From this line, this man would come soon. And just in a couple of weeks, we'll be talking about this man named Abraham. And then from Abraham, we'll find from Isaac and Jacob, and then this king David. And then this lineage will come until a Messiah is born. A Messiah is born in humility. But God chooses for his own glory. And from this line, the Messiah will come. Now, all these nations that have been mentioned play a vital part in the history. And many of them will try to thwart this coming Messiah. And I just thought of this verse, I apologize. But it's Psalm 2. It says, "Why do the nations rage, and the people plot a vain thing? And the kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the God and against his anointed, saying, Let us break their bonds in pieces and cast away their cords from us." All these nations would have thought that maybe they had some power, a power that was given falsely, but they did not. God's plan was going to come. And as I said, the war still rages today. Nimrod may have started the plan. Although Satan is the architect of this, so we can see that. This false religion, these false beliefs. But we can see today that this system still works the same way. But today, we even have new weapons. We have science and we have intellect. Science and intellect that say, look at us. We don't need a creator. We evolved. We weren't created. We have all the answers. It's the same thing as in Genesis 10. It was that same humanity is better than God. Humanity set itself. And you see, it was this system, this world system was corrupted early. Even as it began, it was corrupted by sin. But it's that world system that's still in place today. And it's that world system that we walk in. Now, I have a question for you this morning. Let's dig a little bit in history. I know that sometimes maybe you say history's not my thing, but I just want to lay a little bit on this. I want to ask you a question. Is or has the church been a casualty in this war? The early church suffered, was martyred, but it grew and it grew strong. Now, how do you fight against that? The church was strong. The church was growing. The faith of the church couldn't be shaken. How do you fight against that? Well, there was a man, I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with a man named Constantine. Constantine did something, when you stop and think about it, and say his plan was absolutely brilliant. They brought the church into the system. The church became part of the government. Constantine, through a sign, said Christianity needs to be the official religion in Rome. Everybody, you need to be a Christian. Get on board with Christianity. But what he did, at first thought, you think, oh man, that's a great thing. That's awesome. We won. But what he did is he slowly started to change some of the way they did things. Some of the beliefs needed to be tweaked a little bit to fit into the government. See, less than 300 years since the beginning of the church was brought into this world system. And I think many of the churches are still caught into that. A lot of the beliefs that you might think, well, that's a solid belief. If you look back and you look at the tradition of where that belief came from, actually wasn't biblical, but it was brought in from the system. The church became part of this world system. Now, what Constantine did is brought the church into some of these pagan practices. But again, that also wasn't a new thing. Back in Nimrod's day, Nimrod didn't only begin this world system. He didn't just begin this world government. He started religion. He started his own religion. As tradition states, Nimrod was actually married to his mother, Semiramis, and they began this, what was called the mystery religion of Babylon. And a lot of, when you go back and you study this, you see some of that still influences our beliefs today. We're talking way back in chapter 10. And a lot of that Constantine brought back up and has been into our church. So, Satan's plan is easy. It's either to poison or to dilute. Either poison so much of what the church says that it's bad. The true church is still on the earth. The true church is here. And if we become a Christian, what we have to understand is when we become a follower of Christ, it is said, 2 Corinthians 5:17, the believer of Christ, that we are an ambassador for Christ. 2 Corinthians 5:20, we are his ambassadors. Now, an ambassador, the term ambassador is someone that represents a country. And if that person goes into another country, they are not bound by that country's laws. They are not bound by that country's beliefs. They have something called an embassy. Truly, that's what the church was meant to be, is an embassy. A place that does not follow the rules of the land. Is not part of this world, but represents God. Truly, that was the meaning of the separation of church and state. But as we look today, and as we look at chapter 10, we see that God has put in the plan all of this. God has put all these nations in place. All of this is for one reason. And that is to bring glory to God and the coming of Messiah. This is the story of our redemption. Now, today, I know I speak to a lot of people that maybe are members of different churches, and I'm not putting down any church. But what I'm saying is we have to be careful to not fall in the same traps that were ensnared so many years ago. And that first trap that was so dangerous today is a trap that's called tolerance. I don't know if you've ever seen the bumper stickers, very popular, coexist. And that coexist has got all these symbols. We can all get along. We can. And I'm sorry, I'm not up here being negative, but there are doctrinal things that do divide us. We have different beliefs. There is only one way, and that's through Christ. Through his blood. There is no other way. Then we have the second trap, okay? Tolerance, maybe that's too much for you. How about some compromise? Let's compromise here. We can all get along. We can all get along. Compromise. There's certain things we can be fuzzy on, okay? And ultimately, it's pride. It's pride. It's what Nimrod started with. When Nimrod, when he spoke to the people, he knew what to say. He stoked the pride. He stoked the man's heart and said, you know what, aren't we great? Can't we accomplish anything? Can't we do it? And I said, yeah. He knew the words to say. This message, as I wrote it out, I didn't have as much time to study this week as I would like. I was sick a couple of days and had some things going on. I came to the conclusion, different than I started, and I have to take that as providence, but when I started looking at the influence that Nimrod had then, that still influences the church in our culture today, it took me to Revelation. And in Revelation, it talks about the church. And it mentions three different churches I want to talk about. Three different types of churches. The first one is the persecuted bride. I'm going to call them the bride because it's the bride of Christ. The persecuted bride. The bride that will be persecuted, that would be martyred, that would face all these trials. The next one, it talks about the prostitute church. It talks about the church that got stained in the system. The tolerant church. The compromised church. The church that prostituted itself into the system. And ultimately it talked about the purified bride. The purified bride. That's his bride. Purified and spotless. In Matthew 7:13 and 14, when he says that many on that day will say, they've done all these things, he said, I never knew you. It's a narrow, narrow road. So, as we pray about this church, we want it to be a purified body. We want it to be purified inside. And to do that, we need to be careful of what we bring in and what goes out. Because the world system is made to corrupt. The world system is made to destroy. But it's the system that we live in. But it's the scripture that says that we are in the world and not of the world. We are to be separate, and we are to be different, and we are to be His, and we are to be purified. To do that, we must be careful. It amazes me when I read this and I studied these nations, how if you even casually look at the world today, how these little nations that were formed all these millennia ago are still in the news, are still vital, and still bringing the work today. This morning as I close, I just want us to take just a moment, time of reflection of where we're at. How much has the world compromised? Even the churches that are today, how much has the world compromised our systems? How much of the world are we? Are we prostituted? Are we polluted? Or are we pure for Him? Let's pray. Dear Lord, I thank you for strengthening me through this message. It's a hard message, dear God. And as I studied, there were so many different ways, but you always brought me back to this conclusion. Dear Lord, I pray that you reveal to ourselves if we've been prostituted into a way that we don't need to be. If we're too much into this world system that we can't separate ourselves from it. Dear God, that ancient evil is still here. It's still among us. And it still deceives with words of honey, with glistening, with things, dear God, that would be entrapments to us. Help us to have pure eyes to see, dear Lord. Help us to have pure eyes to see what is real and what is of value. Be with us this morning. And I pray, dear Lord, as we go through these prayer requests, the jaws, the time we had this morning, dear Lord, just give us a purity, dear Lord, of service, to have a purity, dear Lord, of who we are and what we need to be for you. I ask this in your precious holy name.